Hi, everyone. Yeah, so we'll be switching our mic like this. There's a little bit of a mic issue. So please let us know if you can't hear us or if it starts crackling. But yeah, this is going to be a talk about architecting success. So building a great open source SDK. We've been developing the Stream Chat SDK for 2-3 years now. So there's a lot that we've learned in the process of making the SDK. And this is not going to be a stream talk. It's going to be a talk about our experience using it. But we will be using some Stream SDK examples. So yeah, quick introduction. My name is Gordon, and this is Devin. We are developer advocates working at Stream, though we work very closely with the engineering team or the Flutter engineering team. Devin previously also was working solely on the Flutter SDK. So yeah, just a quick introduction from our side.
Hey everyone. So today's talk is going to be based on the Stream Chat Flutter SDK. So if you don't know much about Stream, we provide chat and feeds SDKs, which we have multiple variations of. So we support everything from Flutter to Android and iOS to even Unreal and Unity. So we have a lot of these SDKs, and today's talk is going to be based on our experience from almost 2020, like start of it, building out the Chat SDK. And so today, let's just take a look at the topics.
So yeah, the topics that we'll cover, it's going to be starting with the evolution of the SDK. And the reason we're going into the evolution is because we're not perfect. We also made mistakes along the way, and those mistakes informed the decisions that we made later on. So it's important to have a little bit of a backstory, at least for us, when it comes to how we approached the developments of the SDK and how that informed the decisions that we made later. Briefly going to touch on how we work as a team and the tools that we use, and then everything that goes into an SDK. Us being privileged enough to be at FlutterVikings, there are some heavy hitters in the Flutter community that are present at this conference. Most of those are working on open source SDKs. I'm sure some of you are working on open source SDKs. And I think something you can attest to is that it's a lot of work, especially if you're doing it in your free time, which a lot of people are doing. We're privileged enough to work on it full time as our day job, and it's still a lot of work doing it from 9 to 5. So kudos to everyone that is maintaining an open source project on their own. It's a lot of work. And yeah, we hope we can share some valuable tips and tricks and knowledge on managing an open source SDK.
Yeah. So first things first, we kind of need to know how to build a good SDK before we do all the kinds of marketing and everything else. So just a bit of background about me. Today I work on the developer advocacy team at Stream, but before that I was 1.5 years on the engineering team directly. So we very initially we had again an MVP, and then we iterated through a lot of versions of the SDK. We learned a lot of lessons along the way. So the engineering lessons are some that are very teachable moments, honestly. So can you just go to the next one? Okay, so these are a lot of people have contributed to our SDK as well. So again, these are just a few. So some we've worked directly with us, some have worked open source, and it's been a great journey working with everybody who uses it, our customers, and everybody who wants to contribute to it. So yeah, just a quick shout out to the contributors. Okay, so first things first, it is really important to build an MVP. The MVP is like a litmus test as to is this going to be a viable SDK? So you're going to have you can't put in too many resources too quickly. Otherwise, you're going to just exhaust all the resources and maybe not even have something you can ship. So first of all, an MVP tests out the viability of the SDK. The UI UX and architecture will differ for every single thing you build, right? So the projects will not be same. Even if you build two similar projects, they will have some nuances that will need to be worked out. So the UI UX and architecture can be tested in this MVP, and you don't need to go to an extreme detail to actually test it out. It's obviously cost efficient, and it at least for us, it's like you can get early feedback from users. Obviously, if you're at a very initial stage, you may not get as much, but as you go along, you will get more and more and more. And even today, if we launch a new product, that helps us now, because it enables us to, like, if is this working for you, is this not working for you, and we can reach out to our own customers and ask those questions. So that's why an MVP is like a really important stage in the process of building an SDK. Okay, so we're calling this an SDK because we have many packages, and it was a journey, honestly, just to understand how do we actually structure this, because it was a very, very tricky proposition. You had massive customers who wanted fine granular control. They were like, we want this custom component to be like this, and we want to be this to be testable, that to be testable, because they have very high standards when coding something. Whereas then there's customers who let's say have they need to get things out quick. They don't really care about it in like the nitty-gritty nuances of customizing stuff, but at the same time they need stuff out quick again. So you need something that's out of the box and that's very quick to use, and you can just ship out quickly. So now you have to make something that's viable for both of these customers. So now that's going to be like, and plus it's a spectrum, right? Like it's not just like I want to ship it tomorrow, I want to ship it in a month or 6 months, whatever it is. You have to kind of make it so that everybody can use it. And this was kind of this was kind of tricky for us, because you can't really do this very easily. So one is to keep your users in mind. So maybe maybe it's easy for you to focus on the users which are easy to focus on, or it's easy for you to kind of look ahead and see who's going to be using them. Second, separate responsibility to individual packages. You don't want too much stuff bundled one package that people won't use. If there's many customers and there's versions that you're shipping out for, there's versions you're shipping out with changes that don't affect them, then suddenly you're going to have a case where people are just having to upgrade the package over and over again, and maybe if something breaks for another customer, it just won't really hold. And yeah, it's easier to add features and to take away. That's the third point. So okay, so here's how the main SDK is structured right now. In here, we have a total of 5 packages, and we started from one, right? Our MVP really started from the LLC. So the LLC was where we basically just exposed all the Dart, all our APIs and stuff in the Dart client. So that was more of, but again, that was the relatively easy operation, that just exposing our APIs. Now the question was, where do you go from here? So initially, just you need to build something that users can use and people can ship out quickly. So we built the Chat Flutter SDK. When building that, what happened is it was easy to use, obviously, but sometimes again, what used to happen is people came back, what, we want a lot of the functionality that offers, and we don't have to do so many low level things. At the same time, we want something that we can completely customize. So we want UI builders instead of pre-made UI components. So we then decided to launch the core one. Then obviously there was a complaint where, okay, we want offline support. So we had persistence. So initially it was all bundled up in the Chat Flutter, but then we realized, what, let's separate this out so we can get you custom implementations of your offline data storage, and then obviously localization, so you can add translations, because chat translation is important, and that was kind of unavoidable. So this is how our SDK right now is structured. And it took some time, but at the same time, you kind of have to understand, right? So you have to understand the needs of users, and then what we think is we've achieved at least a middle ground between making it not too granular for users who want to use it immediately, but at the same time not just out of the box and not customizable at all.
So yeah, that leads in nicely to using a monorepo. So if you're not familiar, a monorepo is a software development strategy where code for many projects is stored in the same repository. So this has a lot of benefits. Essentially, it's all of your packages are in one repository. That obviously makes sense. The main benefit is that linking between packages become really easy. You don't need to depend on a different repository within your pub, for example. Version management becomes a lot easier, and it's also a way for people to easily discover your packages. So if you have packages that are related and similar, it's best practice to keep them in the same repository. someone visits the repository, they can see all of the packages that are related to your SDK. And it also obviously improves testability, and that's actually boils down to separating it into different packages. But it also means that when you write your test, you can write testing scripts that performs a test in a repo, and all of your tests can be easily grouped together. And you may be asking, how do you do this? Honestly, you can do it in whatever way you want. You can automate this yourself. At Stream, we use Melos. It's essentially a tool made by Invertase to simplify creating a monorepo for Flutter. Definitely recommend this as a tool that you can use. It's helps us a lot. It's still, I actually believe, in beta stages, but yeah, we've been using it for over a year now, and you can choose what you want to opt into. What is listed here, I copied from Melos's website. How we use it is maybe different to how you would use it. But yeah, it provides a lot of benefits. The main one being that you can automatically version and get a dependency from your linked packages. So it automates the boring stuff and simplifies your life. A very nice feature that Melos also has is the ability to easily execute predefined scripts. The code that is shown there is just showing you an example of running .analyze. It's just an arbitrary example that we're showing here, but it's similar to makefiles. So if you've ever used a makefile, you have your makefile in your main package root, and that has like a series of commands that you can easily execute and automate some tedious tasks. The benefit, though, of this is that it also simplifies testing, because later down the line, once you want to do CI/CD, it's not a matter of you making these scripts from scratch. It's a matter of you installing Melos through the pub store, and then you running the same commands that you would normally run locally. It's also a very nice way to onboard new members, and this is especially important if you are creating an open source package, because you want people to be contributing, and you want to make that process as simple as possible. You don't want someone to say, this is an awesome open source project, I'm going to contribute to this, and then the moment they try and install it, they hit a wall where it's like, okay, this version is not working for this whatever reason. Here you can go really deep, I guess, depending on what you're making. You can also use Docker, but at least for like simple Flutter apps, Melos is fantastic. It's a way someone can just go to the Melos file. They can see, oh, okay, this is what I need to do to get this project up and running. Maybe you're creating build files, like running build runner. So yeah, it definitely simplifies the whole process for your team. And this leads into automation, because when you can automate, definitely automate. There's a joke that says developers would rather spend 5 hours trying to automate, a task that would normally take 5 seconds. And maybe that's true, maybe not, but it's definitely worth it to automate everything that you can do. And a big benefit is to bring this automation into GitHub and to have this as integrated into your development cycle as possible. For us at Stream, these are just some examples of what we do. For example, enforcing a certain amount of test coverage on each pull request. So there will be an automated script on GitHub that will fail if test coverage is not a certain percentage, or if PR titles are not enforced, or if Dart code metrics is not up to standard. Something that's also nice is the package called Pana, which basically runs Dart code metrics for you, and it gives you an overview of what your Dart pub score would look like. So before you actually publish your package, you can see what your score would look like. It's not always perfect, but it normally gives really good results. And this is going to lead into the next topic of conversation, is sample applications. And for us, we also automate creating our sample app, or like every time a new we push to develop or master, we update our sample application automatically. And we'll be talking about sample apps a lot more.
So sample apps were really, really important for a lot of reasons. One is that you usually have an example app with your SDK. Now that example app sometimes is just like a hello world to the package. Sometimes it's much slightly more comprehensive. But the main understanding is that not everybody can run the app. Not everybody is going to go to a GitHub repository, fork it, or just use your SDK and do it. Ultimately it has to reach the decision makers. So to show what the capabilities are of your SDK, you need to actually demonstrate, okay, all of the features in a nice, clean, concise way, and demonstrate everything in a nice app that they can download without having any code knowledge, so that you reach the decision makers of any company who would potentially use your SDK. So sample apps, for that reason, were important. We do also maintain an example app, but at the same time it allows us to actually see if something goes wrong. We know because of sample app, so all features simultaneously can be tested. At the same time, a lot of other people can actually see the sample app and go, okay, look, Stream does support this. So there's a lot of utility to having a sample app. And yeah, I mean, like, you can find errors before they reach your customers as well, because if you break something, I mean, it should not go to that stage, but if you do, you will at least see all the features, you can test it, and at the same time have that kind of just reassurance that your build you push on Friday will not really break. So just the next one. This is a demo of our sample app. And we have it so that it automatically, so every time, so we have a main branch called develop, and every time we push any commit to develop, we have a pipeline that runs and pushes a new example app, so it's a sample app. And yeah, that automatically tells us, okay, like, if we can test it out very easily. And I think it's much better than like doing that manually and just having like, effectively just like a nightly build after every commit. Yeah, so
To continue on this, if you're building in the open, it's also a great opportunity for you to just have fun. For us, at least, it means that we can use our SDK in some unique ways and also provide some examples to customers. Because although it may be intuitive for you how to use your product or your SDK or your code, for that example, it may not be intuitive to everyone that's using your package. So whenever you can provide a detailed example that does something very specific, you should do that. And these are just some of the fun ones that we've done over the last year or so. The left one is showing you how to integrate Firebase authentication with our package with like custom UI. The middle one is Arrive animations. And the right one is something that Devin made, who loves Chase so much that he integrated Chase into our Chat SDK as well. And this is like in real time. So it's a great time for you to also just have fun and experiment. And I definitely encourage you to do that, as it also shows you limitations of your package. Because if you're using it and you're struggling to do something kind of unique, kind of out of the box, then definitely the people using your SDK is going to be struggling. So yeah, take the opportunity to build cool things. In addition to this, one of the things that we've recently, a few months ago, started doing is tracking errors in our sample app. And you may think if you have like a full-on application, maybe a banking app or a very important app, you should be tracking errors. Should you be tracking errors in a sample application? That doesn't make sense. Well, if you're building an SDK, it definitely makes sense. You should be tracking errors in some way, as there may be some obscure things that's really hard to reproduce. We had a few clients have the issue that their WebSocket connection would randomly drop and users wouldn't be able to reconnect to their messages. And after the third request where we got this and us trying to reproduce this, it got to the point where it's like, well, we can't reproduce this. It's too obscure. There's the series of events that lead up to this. And this is where error tracking, and no matter what tool you use to do this, becomes really important. And it's also important for you to think about the SDK users. Do you make it easy for them to track errors in your SDK? Is it difficult for them? Is this something you should be thinking about from the start?
okay, so the critical difference between building an SDK and building an app is that in an app, you can do one thing many ways, many bad ways, and the users will never really see that, right? That, like, it will be hidden until something goes horribly wrong. in an SDK, you can't really do that. Like all your code is obviously open source because the app has to use the package. But regardless of that, that may be an evaluation metric that customers potentially will use to judge, okay, should we use this SDK? Because everything is open. Your code quality is open. So if you're doing bad code and still works, it doesn't really matter because everybody's going to see that. If you have bad test coverage, it's gonna absolutely matter because everybody will see what it is. And the smallest things, right? How if they have difficulty filing an issue, that's a pain point for them. If if they're seeing PRs that are just like that look like a mess, that again could be a massive red flag to them. So because everything's out in the open, things will not be as simple, and you have to be very aware of how you present the SDK and the code, and the people who are maintaining it. So you will be under a microscope, not just in the sense that, okay, can we use it well, but also, yeah, how does it actually look, right? So the other thing, like I think Gordon was describing, is we recently made everything publicly visible. So we had, most companies really have an internal issue tracking board such as Jira or something like that. And what happens with that is you have these issues and you have them internally, but users have no real scope into what are you currently doing apart from maybe GitHub issues and stuff. Users have no like insight into, okay, like why are they not replying because they're busy fixing this issue. So what we did was just like, we did a 180 and we said, okay, let's make everything publicly visible. So we had everything that we were doing as publicly visible things. This has potential issues in the sense that now everything, all the Jira tickets will be converted into issues, for example. And that could be concerning to some users because if they just come and see, okay, this has 200 issues, that's not really going to scan well, right? So that is a question that you should ask yourself. Do you want your issues to be publicly visible in a sense? So yeah.
So yeah, this boils down to how do you do project management. And yeah, we quite enjoyed this tweet. As a developer, what's your least favorite tool you have to use and why is it Jira? So yeah, just a little bit of a joke. Not going to bash on Jira too much, but part of the reason that we also wanted to switch is because, like Devin mentioned, we wanted all of our issues to be open source. If people look at our SDK, it should at least look like it's being actively worked on. And you also want to avoid duplicate requests. We had a lot of customers on Zendesk asking for features, which is in our feature pipeline that we wanted to implement at some stage, and then got their same request on GitHub. So this was also a reason that we finally decided to move everything from Jira to GitHub projects. So yeah, at the time, GitHub projects was just coming out of beta. So yeah, we also, our Android team started using GitHub projects in a pretty unique way where they were able to maintain private issues and public issues by creating a private repository and the public repository, and then creating the issues that had to remain private in the private repo, but then linking it to GitHub projects in the same way. So then those issues won't pop up for everyone that may be visiting GitHub that's looking at the project outline. However, there are some limitations. For all Jira's faults, it does have a lot of nice automation, and this automation is lacking on GitHub projects, which as a result required our team lead to do a lot of manual, button clicking, and at the end of each sprint, filling things in manually. So this eventually led to our lead engineer very excitedly in one meeting saying, "Guys, we're using ZenHub now." So at the time, that's the first time I actually ever heard of ZenHub. If it's the first time you're hearing about it, it's a very cool tool. You integrate your GitHub account and you can automatically use it as you would have used Jira, but it's kind of like GitHub projects in the sense that you get a nice Kanban, but it does a lot of automation out of the box for you. And the neatest thing about it is the fact that it has a browser extension, so you can automatically integrate into GitHub. As you can see, this is GitHub's page, and this is the ZenHub tab. So this is the best of both worlds for us at this stage and how we do our project management.
So submitting bug and feature requests is quite a big thing, because what happens is usually there's multiple facets to any project. So for example, Stream has a backend which handles all the message storage on every databases, all of that stuff, maybe dashboards. And on the front end, we have obviously our SDKs and stuff like that. So you have to kind of maintain a clear line of communication with users saying that, okay, if you have an issue, where should you submit it? And this can be, this does not necessarily have one answer, because often you may have, issues on GitHub. You may have, so for example, we have Zendesk, which we use to handle customers directly contacting us. We also handle GitHub issues. So it really depends on who's going to contact you, really. So if there's somebody on the engineering manager side, or if like there's somebody who doesn't code but knows the issue, they may not obviously use GitHub. So you have to maintain a clear channel, at the same time have clear responsibilities defined, so that if this is a GitHub issue, who should handle it. So letting these issues go on for a long time also signifies to new users that, okay, maybe if this issue is open for 3-4 months, maybe we should not pursue this SDK. So it becomes like a very critical thing to manage this thing well. And yeah, and issue templates really help a lot, because the thing is, you want the most information immediately and the most concise. So for example, you may need some exemplary production. You may need just more details, a log, a stack trace, whatever it is. So having an issue template really would help, and just maintain those where possible. Now, this is more contentious. So the thing is, with testing, it's okay. There are people who will absolutely say, no, we need to have 100% testing. And there's people who say, wait, let's just do everything and then add testing at the end. This is kind of it's a difficult topic, because the thing is, like, no matter how much you would like to have 100% testing, you may not necessarily have the resources to actually do that immediately. And also there's some reasons not to do it immediately as well. So because testing is initially time consuming, but that's not really the point of it. So as an example, we were building that SDK, right? And let's say we have the base low level client and the .api endpoints. That's very easy to test, and that will not likely change much. But at the same time, let's say we build an MVP of UI components. That will change a lot. And if you spend time writing tests for components that will change a lot, suddenly it doesn't make you're wasting those resources. And plus then that your new features, your new additions, and maybe your further tests get delayed again. So there's a good balance to maintain. If you have stuff that's going to change a lot, you have to be pragmatic about it. But at the same time, if you have stuff that's more concrete, well defined, definitely write tests for that. So at the same time, once the tumultuous kind of period is over, definitely do write tests, because it helps a lot. If you have a high coverage of testing, suddenly like larger companies are very much open to using an SDK, because again, they don't want something that has a low test coverage. And at the same time, if you push something that is if you push something bad, then you will know immediately, so you avoid any breaking changes as well. So that's kind of a that gives you an overview. Again, fine line to walk, but at the same time, advantages to both sides, but mostly have tests. So semantic versioning is something that we really recommend doing, because the thing is, a lot of times people will not necessarily have time to read your documentation or read all the blog posts you're doing. So you might take care of a lot of stuff. Let's say you're pushing out a breaking change, next week, and you're doing a whole blog post migration. You're doing a whole, like the whole shebang is there. But at the same time, people will not have time to actually read it. So what you need is a predictable way that, okay, if I change to this, is there a potential for there to be a breaking change? So semantic versioning avoids any kind of surprises, and people will at least understand that, okay, if they upgrade a major version, then potentially there may be a breaking change. But otherwise, if it's not, then they know that, okay, we're okay with the SDK being as it is. So it becomes like a nice predictable way of upgrading an SDK, and it will just help your customer. It will make the lives of your customers much better, in a sense.
Which leads us into performance is critical. So you may have heard this, Flutter is fast by default, and you should only care about performance until it's an issue. And I fully agree with that statement, but it's something to consider if you don't want to introduce breaking changes. It may be that your performance is bad and you may need to introduce a breaking change just to fix an issue you had with your SDK or your architecture or your state management or whatever else it may be. So it is important to think about performance, at least to the sense that you should be aware of it by following best practices. And this can also be part of your testing cycle. Instead of just performing regular tests, you can perform performance tests as well, or at the very least perform regular reviews and some automated assessments. At last year's Viking, I did a whole talk on performance. So if you're interested in that, you can check that one out. One thing I want to mention in this particular talk is a note on Flutter list views. For a Flutter chat application, for a chat application, having a list view is obviously important. Everything is a list view. And for most SDKs, this is a notoriously difficult topic to get right, as it's quite expensive rendering a list view. Our React and React Native teams have done extensive work trying to optimize their lists as well. So this isn't a Flutter issue, it's a cross-platform issue and something that Android and iOS has solved years ago. Flutter does a very good job. There's a very good blog post on the Flutter docs discussing how they do list views and how it's integrated into like Flutter natively with the way that Flutter does rendering. However, there are two little snags. The one for us is having a reverse list. So typically in a chat application, you would list messages from bottom to top, normal list views from top to bottom. And a normal list view going from top to bottom, new items are added to the bottom. If you reverse a list in Flutter, it goes from bottom to top, but new items are added to the top. But for messaging, you want it to be added to the bottom of the list. The problem is that the moment you do that, Flutter will actually recreate all of the render objects in that list view. So you'll be performing, well, Flutter is fast because it's recreating widgets a lot, but it's reusing render objects. But the moment you change the order of a list view, it's recreating all those render objects, which is obviously an issue from performance, but it's also a state issue because now you are losing that state. So as an example, if there was like an image, that image may be reloading, or whatever state is in that message, it may be reloading. So luckily, this is easily solvable. Flutter provides find child index callback. Essentially, all you need to do is give it the new index for the item in the list. We made a video on our YouTube channel on that if you are interested in watching that. But the next problem for us was that we needed the ability to search for a message and then jump to that message in a list. And this is a complex thing to do as well, because in Flutter, there's no way of knowing where the item in a list is. You can only jump to a particular offset. So if you want to know where to jump in a list or to a particular item, you need to calculate the offset of that item in the list. And for us, there's no way of knowing how long a message may be. You don't know what attachments will be sent, and you also don't know what custom attachments might be sent. For example, Devin sending a chessboard. So yeah, we ended up using the package called scrollable positioned list, and it solved the it solved the jump to item issue, but it didn't solve the reverse list, which ended up with us forking the package and maintaining our own version of it, just so that we can actually have both of these, so that we can reuse render objects, but also jump to items in a list. So yeah, we are currently invested in this, and we're exploring some other options as well. A mistake we made with our list view. One of our clients sends us this screenshot saying that if they have a lot of images in their app, they're noticing it's using over 1.5 gigabytes. So we're like, oh, there's a problem. This shouldn't happen. And a small API change on our side resulted in us not using the optimized images or like resized images. So this was rendering like a 2 megabyte image instead of the 20 kilobyte version, for example. It wasn't rendering the thumbnail. So this was a small API error, a small API change that resulted in a front-end performance issue. And we could have resolved this with an automated test that also, reviewed memory usage. So yeah, something to consider about. If you are using images in your list, or if you're using images in your Flutter app, there's a neat little tool you can use, highlight oversized images, It's in the DevTools. It's this little button on the left there. If you click that, it highlights all the images that are too big or rendered in the incorrect size on your app. So shows you where you can use smaller images.
So this was one of the most obvious things that we wanted to do initially, like support all the platforms. And it has not been a very easy journey because we have to start early on and then kind of see if we can integrate all features of chat, video, images, everything into Flutter. But yeah, I mean, it's been going pretty well now. You can support all the platforms, and that's the more platforms you support, that's going to be a much greater thing for anybody who is potentially considering you. Obviously, because they don't have to make but other versions, or maybe even use other versions of your own SDK for Android, iOS, or whatever. So if you can support all of the platforms, suddenly they can use Flutter and they don't have to look anywhere else. So that's a really good thing when building this out. Another advantage in Flutter is that we have federated plugins. And with that, you can have an interface. You can have these, localized, these local plugins, and they can essentially support each platform. And that's a really good advantage because, obviously, you can just defer responsibility to each kind of plugin for each platform. So that's something to consider when building out your own SDK as well. Yeah. So this was the desktop and web beta that we had, and this also took us a lot of stuff to build out. Video, for example, a lot of stuff like it just did not work plain and simple on web and desktop. So we had to actually work on it a lot. But after a lot of effort, we had a web and desktop beta out. And yeah, it's like, especially video was a bit of a concern, a lot of stuff, but I think more recently it's been coming on to more stability in a sense.
Yeah, to add to that, it's great that Flutter supports all the different platforms, but it adds some overhead to you as a maintainer, because the moment a new platform is supported, it may be easy. It may be, you add that extra build folder and everything works, or it may be difficult where you run into issues with certain packages that aren't supported, or maybe you need to build your own federated package that uses multiple packages together. We ended up doing a bit of both. For us to support video, as Devin mentioned, we had to use different packages. So we have conditional imports. So it's technically easily solvable, but yeah, something to consider. It's definitely been a fun experience building for web and desktop as well. It's a different design perspective you need to think about, and this has been an interesting journey for us. So yeah, if you haven't experimented with desktop and web yet, definitely recommend it. So yeah, moving on, that was the engineering part. We're going to quickly talk about the developer experience and customer support. And yeah, this is a very nice overview of what developer experience is, a holistic experience offered to developers throughout the lifecycle they interact with your product or service. And the moment someone uses your SDK or your product for the first time, that's when the developer experience starts. And it's important to think about that whole process from start to finish. As Flutter developers, we are probably all using Flutter because the developer experience is so good. You can even say that Flutter is fun to use. So that's something that you should be thinking of from the start, is what that experience looks like. Because there is a cost to having a bad developer experience. That cost may be monetary because developers are expensive, and each hour you waste for someone to debug is an hour of money lost. But it can also be internally bad. So it can be bad for your internal developers, so the people that are making the app. If it's not a pleasurable experience to work on it, that's also a form of bad developer experience, because it is internal and it is also external. And yeah, at the end, the people using your SDK may become frustrated.
So the tutorial page is one of the main pages to get, right? Because that's going to be often the first experience for your users when they come to your platform. And you have to kind of maintain a balance between, okay, showing that like how easy your SDK is, at the same time giving them a glimpse of new features as well, so that they know there's more to look at, and at the same time have a third thing where they have further recommended reading, or if they want to know anything further, they have all the information right there. So having a good onboarding, having great tutorials will probably make the most difference in terms of content than anything else will. Yeah, and documentation and guides obviously alongside the tutorials. Once they get to know the SDK, if they want to see if something is possible, if they want to see how to do something, you have to make really easy, understandable content. At the same time, providing all the information they need about, for example, localization. But basically, the critical thing is making them know, okay, this thing, whatever you're trying to do, is possible in this SDK, and that is what you have to kind of show them through documentation and guides. And having documentation is a really important part of development experience, and you have to kind of get it right as well.
Yeah, and you also need to meet people on different platforms. People prefer to learn in different ways. They prefer to experience things in different ways. So one example that we've recently started doing is also making code tutorials and showing how to use our SDK. And yeah, that's something you can also consider.
So when using the SDK as well, make sure you have very detailed error messages, in the sense that you can have multiple tiers of them. As much you need to show them what the problem is. Basically, if they can solve it before you do, that's like basically a plus for you. So we have, for example, a log level, and you can change it to from info to absolute severe, where it displays absolutely everything.
Yeah, we're going to go a bit faster through the slides, but SDK abstractions, that's what Devin mentioned with creating different packages. At Stream, that also means for us supporting different SDKs, Android, iOS, Flutter, and you need to meet your developers, at their level of abstraction. Some people might prefer to use a UI package, others may prefer to integrate directly with the API. And even if though you built that really awesome UI experience or whatever that may be, you may also need to build an awesome API experience, because people are using your products in different ways. And something that's you can do as well is interactive integrations. So Dartpad and Zap, if you've not heard about Zap, you can chat to Invertase outside. These are great examples of you creating interactive content for people to learn and experience your software or SDK. So instead of someone installing it and debugging it and running Melos, you can just maybe integrate it in a web app, and they can integrate it. That's something not we haven't done at this stage, as we are just getting to web support now, but it's something to consider along the road.
So having good UI and dashboards apart from the SDK as well. So having a proper dashboard, having capability to do stuff outside the SDK without code, so that makes it easier. That makes a lot of lives easier by just changing a few things, adding actions, doing token management, logs, whatever. So that makes you don't need to answer as many things. If there's some simple query, that can be directly solved through the dashboard itself. So having great dashboard and some UI without any code interaction is very important, if possible. Any developer tools that go along with that are also very critical, because if you have a CLI, edit integration, no code, low code, no code or low code platforms also help a lot. But at the same time, any of these tools which can do some things which may be a one-off, which those could be really important to a lot of people.
Yeah, and like Devin mentioned about Simver, migration deprecation, this is something you want to do correctly, and ideally you want to avoid it, because as you can see, if you want to do it correctly, it's a lot of work. These are just some examples that we do when we release a new version, and documentation is difficult, and updating documentation is, in my opinion, even more difficult than writing the SDK. So yeah, if you can avoid migration and deprecations, try to. But if you do it correctly. So yeah, feel free to read this later.
Yeah, and this is just a continuation to customer support where we have all these channels of supporting users, but at the same time you have to talk to them. You have to understand what their troubles are, because if you don't understand, you may be you'll be in your own echo chamber, and that will lead a lot of issues to not be solved. So you have to know what the pulse is around the product, and that helps a lot when solving any issues that come up.
And part of that journey means that you need to identify the frequently asked questions. This is a very important step not to miss out on. If more than one person is asking the same thing, that means you have an experience issue or you need to update your documentation. And you can also do it in multiple different ways. You can create content, like, for example, frequently asked questions, guides, videos. And here's an example. This is a question that we received a lot on our SDK. And it was really, really nice that our lead engineer was just like, yeah, we recently wrote a blog post about that, and redirect the person. We also asked and answered the question ourselves on Stack Overflow. So definitely make use of SEO to your benefit. Let people discover the issues on GitHub or Stack Overflow without you actually having to manage that customer support yourself.
And it's really important to use your own SDK yourself as well. Use it on projects, use it internally, because it helps you understand what yourself, what is something you can improve or what is something that is going wrong. So for example, we have a water cooler app that we use internally as well. And that helps us understand that we build all SDKs and just understand, okay, this is something that we can improve. This is something that's going wrong. And if you use your own SDK, you will kind of know what the line is and where you really want improvements, because otherwise it just becomes you write the tutorials, you write the example side, but it doesn't really translate into a real world experience.
And yeah, as open source developers means that we need to stay up to date with the latest developments in Flutter, which may be awesome, but it may also mean that it's more work for you. Example for us is the new theme extensions that Flutter has. This is a great opportunity for us to improve the theming that we do at Stream for our chat components. And this is something you should always consider, is how can you use the improvements in Flutter in your SDK as well. And yeah, this is an example of Widgetbook. I see the Widgetbook team is there. This is something that we've experimented as well, playing around locally. There's always ways that you can improve the experience for end users. If you're not familiar with Widgetbook, it's Storybook, but for Flutter. And yeah, we've had a lot of fun using it. And yeah, just a quick example. I'm going to quickly run through the advocacy side of things. Most of you are developers, so you might not care about marketing. But I do want to say it's very important, because if you're not doing that section correctly, then people won't be using your product. And it's maybe not something you like to think about, but it's also important from the perspective of validating that people might actually want to use it. And yeah, it's essentially that question is, if you build it, will they come? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on the competition that you have as well. So here's an example. If you search build a chat app in Flutter, what will pop up? If you don't create content around it, your SDK or your whatever you're building is not going to pop up. And yeah.
And in types of content, there's many types, long form and short form, and make sure you have some long form content, evergreen content as you call it, because some of these articles you can write, you can spend some time on, and they will bring users to your SDK for a long time coming, right? So these are two examples that we've done. I wrote a definitive painting guide for custom paint and stuff, and we also do and that is also an example of us doing completely Flutter content not related to SDK, but at the same time it drives a lot of views to the website itself. And yeah, having evergreen content really helps, because in the long term that is going to give you returns without you even really putting effort in anymore.
And then, yeah, the alternative to that is short form content. These are just some examples. I think most of us probably live on Twitter, but yeah, you can also start dancing on TikTok and making content around your SDK like that. And yeah, this Devin will tell about this.
Yeah, we want to do like an inception thing, but yeah, it was so like that brings to like talks and events. And like before YouTube took over, this was like, you know, the main thing. You can go out and like talk directly to developers. There's no micro targeting because people will come to you instead. So you know, you have people directly in front of you who actually love what you do. And yeah, like talking to them, having talks and events gives you like some of the best exposure that you can actually have.
And yeah, you guys can please come chat to us. Also, if you think our SDK isn't good, please tell us, because that's part of the developer experience and there's ways for us to improve it. And this is the best chance for us to talk face-to-face to people. Then yeah, co-marketing and collaborations. It's always going to be a great opportunity for you to collaborate with peers. And if you're a company, it may even be that you're collaborating with other companies. And yeah, I'm not going to go into examples of what we've done, but definitely reach out to people or SDKs or services and think of unique ways that you can collaborate together. Maybe show how your two SDKs or your two tools can work together, and you can reach a common ground to do a bit of marketing together.
And we do love open source projects. So these are some of the repositories we do sponsor, and also there's actually a lot more. This was more of a general collection, but in Flutter you may see our name a lot on pub.dev. There's more like this Flutter cached image and a bunch of things. But like, you know, sponsoring them gives you great things as well. It drives a lot of people to your content as well. But main thing is you also support open source. You also give back to the community that's given you so much. So yeah, that's one of the things we love doing and who will continue to do for some time.
So yeah, that's a thank you from us. And sorry for going a bit over time. If you have any questions, if we do have time, yeah, feel free to answer, or please reach out to us after this talk. And we also have some swag. So if you want some free bottle openers for tonight, come get it from myself or Devin.
Awesome. Thank you very much. That was a really great presentation.